Welcome back. Another video to add to this. Today we're not going to be talking necessarily about the airflow and what it needs to have to contribute to more horsepower within the engine. Today we're going to be talking about the L98 LS power plant that is part of this entire recall against General Motors right now. There was another YouTube channel called Engineering Explained that just a few hours ago opened up and is addressing the oil and the recall, and without beating around the bush, he's really kind of pointing his finger at General Motors. First of all, I don't care what manufacturer you follow, you like over another. We have to look at things that have stood the test of time. So the Generation 1 small block Chevy is over 50 years old within use. It has proven to be a performance platform. It's very durable. It can handle more power than the equivalent combinations from Ford or Chrysler. The Generation 1 small block Chevy is what allowed the aftermarket to become what it is. Okay? There is no dispute about that. Now, right behind the Generation small block Chevy of the muscle car era of the 1950s through, obviously, last used, I believe, in the 1990s in the daily driver, it was replaced by the LS engine platform, the new generation small block Chevy. Now, I'm not a big fan of the LS engine. I know how to build them and what details behind them make them a very good platform. They are an improvement over the Generation 1 in certain areas. Easy enough. Now, this is going to be pertaining to engine oils, bearing clearances, so on and so forth. In these videos, I've said that people are being led down the rabbit hole with false information that are coming out of multiple YouTube creators and out of the automotive industry entirely. Individuals like Lake Speed, he is pushing these different oils because there's less petroleum product within the oils. But for any of you that have bought an oil change or have changed your own oil or bought a quart of oil, you realize that the price of a quart of oil is extravagantly higher than what it used to be. Not even with an accordance to the inflation of the American dollar. There is more man-made products, the additive packages being put into the oil. It's not being derived, the price of the quart of oil is not being derived by the barrel of petroleum oil. Okay? Now, even though I believe the Generation 1 small block Chevy has an advantage over the LS, especially within aftermarket components, built into the Generation 1 small block Chevy, the LS is no slouch in its own means. The LS has become one of the number one engine platforms to be used in performance, period. So whether that's your typical garage do-it-yourselfer to race teams, the LS has been used for a multitude of performance upgrades, and they are designed to be able to stand a fair amount. Now, the new L98 is a LS engine plant. Okay? The variant of the L98, the differentiation between the LS, as we know it, the LS1, LS2, all the way through the LS7, and the L98 is because from 2020 to right now, General Motors incorporated a cylinder shutdown activation. Okay, so cylinder fuel injection is shut down, the ignition is shut down. Now, going back to previous videos when I said the engine design of all petroleum or four-stroke engines was designed around the fuel. It also incorporates, if that fuel makes it past the sealing rings of the pistons and is introduced through the engine oil, it will thin the oil. It will disrupt its ability to provide a protection within lubrication. It's also going to destroy the amount of cooling that the oil can happen within the engine. Now, the industry right now is kind of laughing at General Motors because they have a massive $600,000 vehicle recall equipped with the L98. Through 4 to 5 different tests that GM has done to try to solve this issue, they have come down to point the finger at the engine oil. Okay? Now, individuals like Lake Speed, many individuals in the performance industry pushing these thinner synthetic motor oils. Everything's about the detergent package or the man-made material additives that are in the oil to provide a cleaning agent and to provide a better lubricant within the microorganisms within the oil, the man-made particles. Now, this is where I'm going to call out some of these individuals, because if you're not paying close attention, not all of the oils are equipped with a detergent package. The OW or 5W viscosity oils do not have a cleaning detergent in the oils, no matter what manufacturer you're buying from. Yet, multiple vehicles out on the road today, many engine platforms from the manufacturers, the most recent move, approximately starting about 2010 until now, is to use these very thin synthetic oils. Now, in cases where the engine is brought up to operating temperature and it is held at that operating temperature for a longer period of time, synthetic oils, with all the addition of the detergent packages, they do perform better than traditional conventional oils. When a thicker viscosity is used. So again, in the OW and 5W, there is no cleaning detergent agent in the oils. Now, at the 10W level, there are. So now, with all of these different recalls, we are seeing the bottom end of the engine, the L98s, their failure rates, whether it's the piston pin retainer rings, to connecting rods, to the crank bearings, the main web of the crank bearings or connecting rod surfaces, they're being wiped out. Even with the LS package having priority main oiling systems. So the oil is not going through the entire engine without pressurized galleys. It is primarily going to the crank and then being fed to the upper valve train components. What is failing in these engines of the L98 or any engine platform from manufacturers over the last 15 years? It's within the bottom ends. It's not necessarily within the valve train that's failing. Once that oil circulates, if any debris is picked up between the crankshaft and the valve train, it wipes out the entire system. Now, oil manufacturers have even come out to the extent, and automobile manufacturers saying, you do not have to change your oil every 3,000 miles anymore. Some of them even saying 10,000 mile oil intervals because of the newer, more advanced engine oils. For any of you that have pulled apart some of these engines where, 8 or 10,000 miles oil interval changes occur, if they're engines with manufacturer directions of using the OW or 5W, the engines are junk. They're unrebuildable. They are throwaway engines. Now, in addition to that, with engines that have cylinder shutdown programs. We can go back to the Cadillac Northstar system of the early 1990s. Their engine based around the Northstar, or even their variation of the Generation 1 small block Chevy within their 4.9 liter, or their Northstar, they also had that cylinder to delete program. Now, when you have a piston traveling up and down the cylinder at whatever 1,000 RPM, we know that there's heat being introduced to the top of the piston upon combustion. The compression of the combustion and also the ignition of the combustion is causing heat to the top of the piston. That pressure is also trying to force those pressures past the piston rings. In the last 35 years, piston ring technology has become more high performance, going to thinner piston rings to ones that have different bevels to them, where they're placed within the piston, and the combination of piston rings. Okay? In the high performance, extreme high performance aftermarket, the options you have as far as piston makeup or piston ring packages is pretty much unlimited. The so-called professionals that are in the oil industry are concentrating on the cylinder wall finish and the piston ring mating. So the smoothness of the cylinder, the crosshatch that might be into it, so on and so forth, and for the ability of the thinner oil to lubricate those tighter tolerances with a smoother cylinder wall. Now, for anybody that's ever rebuilt older V8 engines utilizing cast iron piston rings, there's a thing called a break-in period where the piston rings and the cylinder walls, because of the roughness and the angle of the crosshatch, they will wear together to the point where they wear into each other, just like your favorite pair of shoes. When you first get them, you don't want to wear your shoes all day. But as you start wearing your shoes, they break into the point where they become the comfortable slipper or, a full leather boot that you might wear to work. That was the practice of the older cast iron rings with the crosshatch design of the cylinder walls. Those crosshatches are there to carry the oil and hold on to it as the piston rings are sliding over them to create the lubricant. Now, the newer engine oils, the lower viscosities, they're getting thin enough that they actually are similar to diesel fuel. Okay? Not that much thicker than petroleum gasoline fuel. So now the piston rings are being exposed to the exact same kind of lubricant above and below the piston. With direct cylinder oiling systems, more of that oil is being sprayed to the bottom of the piston or to the cylinder walls to help lubricate it. Because the older designs, especially from Chevy and Ford, Chrysler incorporated a direct cylinder lubricant to the connecting rod. Between the Ford and Chevys, it was entirely because of the slung oil off the crankshaft that made it into the cylinder to lubricate the rings. And it favored basically one side of the cylinder because of the rotation. This goes back all the way to the beginning of this YouTube channel with the piston pin offset. The pistons will cant, causing a gap larger on one side of the piston to the other. The oil fills that gap, allowing the piston to ride on that smaller film of oil. When you start reducing the viscosity of that oil, it has less of a barrier to protect the two components. Same with all of the other bearing surfaces in the engine. Whether it's the crankshaft bearings, camshaft bearings, the area between a hydraulic flat tappet to the camshaft, to the roller tips, between the roller tips and the valves, and even the valves themselves riding in the valve guides of the cylinder head. The oil is designed to lubricate and fill in the tolerances within the engines. Newer engines are coming with tighter tolerances, requiring a thinner oil to be able to get into them. but it's not providing as much of a layer of protection from the lubricant. When you go to the L98 that has introduced, once again going back to the cylinder delete, you are now not exposing the top to the piston on a continuous basis the fuel to lubricate the piston as it's moving up in the cylinder. So the oil is lubricating the piston and the piston rings on the travel down the cylinder. But what is lubricating the pistons as they're moving up in the cylinder? It is the fuel or the unburnt gases during the combustion process. When you shut that system off, it causes hot spots. Here's another thing it does. Now again, even if you're not in the performance industry, if you just rebuild your a typical engine, you might not go to the extent of sending the crankshaft off to get balanced in accordance to the weight of your bob weight of your piston and connecting rod assembly. The engine will survive up to that 5,500 RPM range when it's not balanced perfectly. What happens to a multi-cylinder engine that is designed to balance itself out within a rotation if you shut off one of the cylinders? It causes the crank to not receive load to one of the rod journals. That includes and will throw off the balance of the rotating assembly, as we are noticing from the L98. The thinner viscosity oils are not filling that gap of the connecting rods or the bearing surface is enough to when that cylinder is shut off, it's throwing the balance of the rotating assembly off and causing an interruption within those tolerances. So between the thinner engine oils and the delete systems of the 2020 and newer L98, it's a catastrophe waiting to happen. General Motors knows this from the Cadillac division and the problems they had with the Northstar system. Every single manufacturer, not only GM, every single manufacturer that has incorporated a cylinder delete system, it is causing the exact same effect on their engine application. And they all break. If you want to turn a V8 into a 4-cylinder, build a 4-cylinder. Okay? So don't fall for the technology of some of these new engineering marvels out there, whether it's from the newer synthetic motor oils that do not include a cleaning package, do not supply the amount of protection between metal components, or any of the new EPA regulated fuel distribution shutoff systems or cylinder shutdown systems. They're junk. General Motors has the technology, starting with the Generation 1 small block Chevy, to be able to accomplish 25 miles to the gallon and still get 300 horsepower. Because they've done it multiple times before. Generation 1 small blocks equipped with an efficient forced induction unit, whether it be a turbo or a supercharger, can achieve 25 miles a gallon, and even in aftermarket applications. Again, let's bring Toyota into this discussion. One of the main engineers from Toyota, the actual individual behind TRD, Toyota Racing Development. Some of you might have seen the trucks with that printed on there. They're racing teams at Toyota. He took the GM platform of the Generation small block Chevy, put a small B&M supercharger on it. He was capable of reaching 500 horsepower, and at cruising speeds with an overdrive transmission could accomplish 25 miles to the gallon. Many individuals that are incorporating an LS with turbo applications are also achieving that same kind of performance. The L98 with turbos, with the cylinder delete, with the most advanced oils, cannot achieve what the first generation small block Chevy did with aftermarket components. It is not able to withstand the loss of lubrication created by the newer oils. So again, folks, you have to look at the history and how it has stood the test of time over a long period of time. It's not just the newest fad that might come along of like, oh, I've got to jump on that bandwagon and put it into practice because it's worth a couple of horsepower. In the long run, it will cost you. Even in the case of the L98, from 2020 to 2025, 600,000, almost a half of the amount of L98 engines produced in that time frame are now being recalled for complete catastrophic engine failure. This all comes down to legal aspects of who to point the blame at. Was the insurance companies pointing their fingers at GM, General Motors pointing their fingers at the oil manufacturers, the managers of General Motors pointing their finger at the engineers, the manufacturers pointing their fingers at the EPA and what the things they have to incorporate with all of this. Don't fall for it. While all this new fads and all that stuff, okay, remember the last 4 years, individuals in our population were arguing whether or not a male could become a female or vice versa. It was a fad, a bandwagon that many of the population fell into. If you're that stupid, you don't deserve to be alive. In this case, if you are seeing these recalls, or if you bought a 2020 and newer vehicle and you are having these issues and you are knowledgeable about engines, you know that if the manufacturer would have used a thicker weight 10W30 oil and eliminated the cylinder shutdown system, the L98 would be one of the best engines in the LS platform that GM has ever created. So with that, again, more people are being led down the rabbit hole. You even have YouTube creators with multiple millions of subscribers, like Engineering Explained, one of my favorite channels to watch because it's fairly interesting to watch, coming out and telling you complete BS because he has bought into the new technology. The individual owns a Honda S2000, and that's his pride and joy. That tells you a lot about the cojones of an individual. Have a good one.